The internet has changed the way we live. It has changed the way we work, the way we shop, and even the way we date. It has also changed the way we kill.
I'm Donald McIntyre, and I'm on a quest to explore the dark side of our online world, where one click can lead to murder.
The internet and social media has been a godsend to online predators. Why? Because of the speed in which they can, one, create fake profiles, but two, access victims.
I'll be investigating some of the most disturbing crimes in recent history, where the internet and social media have been used to trick, torture, and kill innocent victims, lured into a virtual world where nothing is as it seems.
Clearly, she did not realise the person she was talking to online was the man who was going to kill her.
In this programme, 15-year-old schoolboy Sofian Belmoaden was stabbed to death by a vicious mob in the middle of the London rush hour. It was a crime that shocked the nation and led to the largest murder prosecution in the history of the Metropolitan Police.
The night before Sofian's stabbing, his teenage killers were communicating feverishly online. Did these social media messages wind the youngsters up into a frenzy where they felt compelled to commit murder? Tensions and fights between rival schools are nothing new, and most are over pretty quickly. They certainly rarely end up in murder. But in the case of London schoolboy Sofian Belmoaden, that's exactly what happened.
On March 25, 2010, at Victoria train station, 15-year-old Sofian was killed by a gang of knife-wielding teenagers. As crowds of horrified commuters looked on, this conscientious young schoolboy found himself on the front line of a pitched battle between pupils from rival schools. Unarmed and alone against the baying mob, he was stabbed and kicked to death in a ferocious attack that lasted just a matter of seconds.
Get off me! Get off me!
How did a petty school rivalry turn into a bloodbath in the space of just 24 hours?
I'm on my way to West London, where Sofian and his family lived and where Sofian went to school. And I want to investigate the role social media played in his murder and how he got caught up in the violence that was to cost him his life.
Sofian Belmoaden grew up in Acton, West London. One of 4 siblings, he had a brother and 2 sisters. Sofian's mother was the daughter of Moroccan immigrants who arrived in Britain in the 1970s.
He came from a very loving family. He observed Ramadan. He was quite a devout Muslim, and to all intents and purposes, he looked like a young boy who was going to go off and have a successful, happy life.
Sofian was a lively boy. He was always smiling, always happy. Well, he was a family person. It was all happy memories, like never bad memories. Obviously, we had our ups and downs with our brothers and sisters. But we used to go bike riding. He used to play football with me when we were younger outside the house. I was like, I'm mini him. So every time I walk out, I get told that I look like him. Even at dinner, I get told that I move like him. So he's forever going to be a part of me, no matter how old I get.
Sofian went to this school, which was then called the Henry Compton School for Boys. The teacher said he was industrious and smart. he was considered polite and popular among his peers, and he was also a talented sportsman. He played centre-half in his local football team.
His father was convinced that had he lived, Sofian would have gone on and played for England. He certainly wanted to play for England, and Chelsea and a number of clubs were interested in him.
How did things go so wrong for this teenager with such a promising life ahead of him? What exactly were the events that led to Sofian's tragic death? For several months, there had been an ongoing feud between Sofian's Henry Compton friends and students from another school, St. Charles College, following a fight at a party.
She's going with me, she's going with me, yeah? Yeah? Watch yourself, mate, watch yourself. What do you mean watch?
Things came to a head on March 24th when pupils from both schools clashed again outside a McDonald's restaurant.
No, I'm not walking away. You're going to embarrass me, are you?
I think some chips had been thrown and things had obviously clearly escalated into a bit of a fight.
A friend of Sofian's threw a punch at one of the rival gang.
What?
And for the St. Charles kids, this loss of face was too much to bear.
The St. Charles School gang decided that they were going to mount a major assault the following day to put their rivals out of the picture once and for all.
As soon as the fight was over, messages started to fly back and forth over Facebook and BlackBerry Messenger.
Well, back in the day, the BlackBerry was the phone of choice for businessmen, criminals, and indeed teenagers. It was easy to use, the messages were highly encrypted and very difficult to intercept. The kids from St. Charles used the BlackBerry Messenger to set up a closed group so they can chat amongst themselves. When the news came through of the attack on McDonald's, they used this app to orchestrate their revenge.
We need to understand that at that time period, the BlackBerry was very much an image for the gangster, an image for the street person, an image for the urban collective, an image for the one that's looking for the surrogate family. Why? Because it means that he or she can set up a group chat, that his friends may not need to be involved in it, and it's a way of continuing to promote that negative lifestyle or that negative behavior without another group knowing who you're talking about.
Bad blood already existed between the pupils from Sofian's school and those from St. Charles, following a bust-up at a party some months earlier. And the scuffle outside McDonald's in Victoria was simply the latest incident in a simmering feud between the teenagers from both schools. And while that incident may have seemed trivial, it was to prove to be the key trigger for the tragic events that followed.
On the 25th of March 2010, London schoolboy Sofian Belmowadden was murdered in broad daylight in a fight between two rival schools. I'm on a journey to find out how a minor scuffle between these two groups of teenagers could have escalated into a murderous rampage in just 24 hours. The day before, a fight had broken out between Sofian's friends from the Henry Compton School and pupils from St. Charles, a rival school. News of the fight spread like wildfire on social media as the St. Charles pupils took to Facebook and BlackBerry Messenger. They were desperate for retribution, and it wasn't long before they were discussing when and where they would exact their revenge. The students suggested using Nanks, slang for knives. This language is all too common among teenagers who find themselves involved in gang activity. But the St. Charles students weren't your average thugs or gangsters.
I've been able to find the police notes on the case compiled after the killers were caught, and they reveal something really interesting. Now, most offenders go through various stages of criminality, and the police call this the forensic escalator. Typically, an offender might start with petty crime before graduating in stages to more serious offences.
But in this case, most of the young teenagers prosecuted in relation to Sofian's murder had no criminal record whatsoever.
What was surprising was that the majority of those taking part in the attack were actually well brought up, industrious pupils, interested in learning, interested in getting qualifications from decent backgrounds.
These were the children who were going to make it, they were going to go to university, they were making the effort to get to school on time, to take 2 buses across London, there and back each day.
But even for teenagers as studious and well-behaved as those from St. Charles, the allure of the gangster lifestyle, glamorized online and in modern youth culture, can still be extremely strong.
The profiles that you see on some of these people's, Facebook accounts, it's all about the gangster image.
To them, this lifestyle seems fun. And to many of these kids who were doing well at school, and a lot of people are always saying, but they were doing well at school. This is not about that. This is about fitting in.
To young people, fitting in often means being part of something bigger than their ordinary everyday lives. The fight with the Henry Compton kids gave the St. Charles gang something to focus on, a flashpoint that would rapidly cause the situation to boil over.
These kids may not have woke up one morning and said, I'm going to murder. But what happens is when people are hyping a situation up, you're no longer thinking whether the person's going to be killed or not. You're just thinking, I have to be a part of that.
I've been reading up on the events leading up to Sofian's murder when he was set upon by an angry mob of teenagers.
But who were they? And what made them go from 0 to 10 on the forensic escalator so quickly?
These kids got involved because they were inflamed, they were hyped, they were gassed. These are the words these young people use. And they were whipped up into a frenzy. It's quite straightforward. And it's not hard to do that when you've got a social media platform that is out there free.
Social media is a very strange animal. We know that individuals on social media say things, do things, support things that they wouldn't dream of doing in the real world. We know many cases where individuals, quite rational, sane, likeable individuals, do very silly or strange or outrageous things online and then regret it afterwards. I think we can clearly see that social media and text messaging worked like a magnifier to increase the significance and the importance of what would have been otherwise written off as a spat, as a bloody nose. And something calamitous had to happen as a result of all of that activity.
Without social media and without the key players involved, they wouldn't have got whipped up into this fury that happened. We have the leaders who are talking about being tooled up, what they're going to do tomorrow, somebody's going to die. And without that, it wouldn't have had the same momentum.
As night fell on March 24th, the BlackBerry and Facebook messages continued to fly back and forth.
Throughout that evening, dozens of St. Charles students were communicating on social media, and their tone became increasingly fevered as they discussed their desperate need to exact some kind of revenge. The chief among those voices was Samson Odigbune, who, unlike most of his fellow students, actually was known to the police. At that stage, he was currently on bail for the brandishing of a samurai sword on a bus.
Odigbune was a criminal in the making. Even at the age of 17, he had previous convictions and was on a spiral that was going to take him up to being a serious criminal.
Another key agitator was 18-year-old Victoria Osateku.
Victoria Osateku was one of the most troubling figures in the whole case. She was clearly a key figure in the whole plan to have this pitched battle. And though she didn't have a criminal record, she'd clearly come from quite a troubled background. She'd been taken in and out of care at an early age. She'd had very little contact with her mother, who'd been a drug addict.
Yet when she arrived at school, she was a good pupil. She was interested, she was engaged, she was doing A-levels, but she was also a bully.
Osseteku adopted a social media alter ego with the name of Missy Mafia, in which she portrayed herself as a young gangster.
People who'd been in her classes would back that up. They said that she did have a reputation for being a bit of a bully, and she clearly enjoyed exerting a control and influence over others.
Following the fight between the St. Charles gang and the Henry Compton kids outside McDonald's, Osseteku spent the night feverishly chatting with her friends on Facebook and BlackBerry Messenger. Her messages became increasingly strident as she demanded swift and brutal revenge. She urged her schoolmates to come to school the next day, tooled up.
Osseteku was busy on Facebook and Twitter and texting, urging people on to take this matter up to a serious level. It wasn't good enough that there was going to be just a set to. This had to be a serious level of violence. So she was saying to them, must bring weapons.
Some of the St. Charles pupils were also in touch with students from Sofian School. Threats and counter-threats were made. And by the time everyone went to bed that night, plans for the next day's violence were well advanced.
I found out that most of the St. Charles's pupils were regarded as a credit to the school. Many had achieved high grades and were expected to go on to great things. But why did so many of these bright young students work themselves up into such a frantic feeding frenzy on social media?
I've come to meet criminologist Dr. Elizabeth Yardley and psychologist Mike Berry to find out why events escalated so quickly.
When you get on the internet, you lose a lot of the control. Now, I write a message that's lacking control, you receive it, you pass it on to other people. The control element just goes. You become disinhibited. It's like being drunk without having to take the alcohol.
In essence, it doesn't feel quite real. You're more disinhibited. You say things you otherwise wouldn't say face to face, but it doesn't seem to have the same impact.
Well, I think we've got to look at what's come before as well. So it could be that there've been confrontations like this in the past where people have taken weapons with them and nobody's got hurt, no one's died. Somebody may have ended up with a minor injury, but actually it hasn't ended up being a big deal. And I think often there's the expectation that, well, nothing serious is going to really happen. This is just a bit of a rumble.
But then when you've got them in the crowd situation, you also have a thing called risk dispersion. And what happens is that more people you have, the risk gets dispersed. So one person wouldn't hit them, half a dozen people hit because they're all showing less and less responsibility.
I think when you've got this discussion going on and there are lots of people involved in it, even when you are saying quite strong things like let's tool up and whatever, sometimes there isn't the feeling that that's actually going to happen. Perhaps it's bravado, perhaps it's people just engaging in this kind of honour contest and status and saying, look how big I am. That there isn't the feeling that this is ever going to really be something. And I think you often find that when you've got interaction in these virtual spaces, it doesn't feel quite real. It doesn't feel like it's going to turn into embodied face-to-face violence. It's just talk.
So why didn't anyone object? Why didn't anybody in that collective say, guys, this is getting a bit out of hand?
Because they didn't think it was getting out of hand. They're going there, they're going to have a rumble, they're going to show the other side who's boss and things like that. That's what it's all about. They just see a bit of a rumble, we're going to win, we're going to put the other ones in their place, and that's it.
On a spring day in 2010, schoolboy Sofian Belmoaden was brutally murdered in a fight between two rival gangs of teenagers at Victoria Station.
When 15-year-old Sofian Belmoaden headed off for school on March 25th, 2010, he had no idea that this would be the last time he would make that journey.
It was just a normal day. He got up, got ready for school around 7 and left by 7:30.
Tensions between two rival groups of teenagers from different schools had built to a fever pitch, and he would be the fatal casualty of a turf war.
He wasn't the type to get involved in fights, but he was always with his friends, so if his friend had a fight, he'll obviously help his friend.
Sofian had gone to the Henry Compton School for Boys in Film, and the day before, one of his fellow classmates had punched a kid from St. Charles's College, and that had stirred up some more bad blood between them. The St. Charles's students were now desperate for revenge.
The previous night, as soon as they got home, the St. Charles pupils spread the news about the punch on social media. Two of them, Samson Odugbune and Victoria Osateku, spent most of the evening stirring up trouble. And the following morning, more messages were exchanged at school. The pressure to exact retribution was increasing.
Intriguingly, about 4 miles from the St. Charles Sixth Form College at Sofian School, Sofian took time out during his lunch hour to call his mother to complain about feeling unwell and asking to come home.
I have a headache and my stomach hurts. Can I go home?
His mother, however, persuaded him to stay at school until the end of the day. We'll never know if Sofian realised that something was brewing and didn't want anything to do with it. What we do know, however, is that Victoria Osateku knew and wanted a fight. She was up for it. And at the same time as Sofian was calling his mother, she was at this Argos store buying a set of knives.
Victoria Osateku bought a set, a £3.99 set of kitchen knives with serrated edges from Argos in her lunch break that day. As a result of the social media exchanges the night before, this was going to be her contribution to ensure that she was arming the side of the gang and to encourage others to join in. She wanted to play a part in ensuring that the gang were well armed and ready and able to commit the violence.
She was the eldest of the group. She was 18 years old. There's obviously become much tighter restrictions on teenagers buying knives because of the number of teenagers murdered, often after school with knives, and they obviously felt that Victoria would be the person who would be able to get them unchallenged and then equip them for this battle.
Victoria Osateku reminds me of a modern-day Lady Macbeth, inciting violence and then providing the weapons to enact it. But like so many of her friends, she had no criminal record to speak of. So what made a young woman with her whole life ahead of her become actively involved in a murderous enterprise?
Osateku had had a difficult childhood and she'd been in care, and clearly not the best start in life for a young woman. But Osateku was somebody who had learned relatively early on the power of manipulation and the power of boasting and putting up a front, putting up an image.
When she gets a role in school as this gangster girl, Missy Mafia, she takes that and she runs with it. She wants to be accepted by the boys. She wants to be feared. She likes fighting. It gives her a sense of belonging. We see that with people who join gangs. They call it street families. They seek something in their peers that they haven't got at home. And I think that explains her really well. She's seeking out something that she hasn't had.
On the day of Sofian's murder, fevered messages continued to fly back and forth via BlackBerry Messenger. Events were beginning to spiral out of control, and the inevitability of a serious conflict grew.
During the day, the heat from the online chatter was adding to the already febrile atmosphere. The barrage of gossip, rumours and threats added to social media bravado built to a clamour for bloodletting and violence throughout the day.
Messaging on social media kept on ramping it up. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. Bring weapons, bring knives, bring banks. This is going to happen.
By the end of the school day at 3:15, there was an expectation of imminent violence. Osseteku and Odigbone and some of the other students at St. Charles College here believed that there was going to be a fight actually outside the school gates. However, when they came outside, there was no one to be seen. They then get a call indicating that their Henry Compton school rivals were headed towards Victoria. They seized the opportunity to take revenge for the previous day's loss of face and headed en masse to Victoria for a bloody fight.
Meanwhile, Sofian and his friends were hanging out after school.
He was with a group of boys. He acted normal, nothing. When I saw him, there was nothing different about him.
But Sofian was hiding something from his sister. In reality, he'd arranged to meet up with his school friends so they could go to Victoria and confront the St. Charles gang.
He put his arm around me and he said to them, "This is my little sister, take care of her." And then I was like, I just felt normal. I didn't think of it as anything. And then I went upstairs and the 72 bus came. That's the bus we get on to go home. And then I looked down at him and I was like to him, Sofian, like, come on, the bus is here. And he was like, go home, I'll see you at home. And that was the last time I spoke to him.
The St. Charles gang travelled to Victoria on 2 buses. Some even flashed their weapons to one another on the bus, seemingly oblivious to the fact that CCTV cameras were recording their every move.
There was so much CCTV available all the way along the line. From the moment the St. Charles gang was on the bus to arrival at Victoria Station, the whole stampede across Terminus Place outside of Victoria Station, all covered by CCTV.
You couldn't pick a worse place in Britain, perhaps the world, to try and commit an act of violence in public. There are more CCTV cameras at Victoria Railway Station than perhaps anywhere else on earth. It's up the road from Buckingham Palace. It's a main transit hub for the whole of southwest London. There's an underground station, Parliament's down the road. It is a security centre for the UK.
Now, this suggests partly that we are dealing with teenagers who are not sophisticated in their planning. The planning was intense, but it had missed the major fact which older, more hardened criminals would have spotted straight away.
The St. Charles group arrived at Victoria Station just after 5 p.m. Among them was Samson Odigbune. While large numbers of the group were carrying knives and screwdrivers, Odigbune was wielding a samurai sword.
In a peer pressure environment, such as mobs or gangs, you've got one-upmanship. I'll bring a knife, well, I'll bring a samurai sword. So I've got a bigger knife than you. Now, the initial indication of using that weapon may be just to scare. But then if someone gets trapped, isolated, like predator and prey, all of a sudden the rage, the anger's there, the rational thinking has gone, and someone's trapped, and that's when we usually find severe violence and even murder can occur.
CCTV footage showed around 40 in the St. Charles's College group. The adrenaline must have been racing, and it was clear that a flashpoint was fast approaching. At around 5:20, Sofian's Henry Compton group approached from the Apollo Theatre direction on the eastern side of the station, gesturing and shouting and clearly up for a fight. The only problem was the St. Charles's group had superior numbers and were better armed. Led by Odigbune and his samurai sword, the rest of his crew had knives, machetes and screwdrivers. Outnumbered and outarmed, Sofian's schoolmates did a runner.
CCTV images showed the St. Charles students charging at the Henry Compton pupils.
The charge was led by Odigbune with a samurai sword, a most fearsome weapon, barging people out of the way, scattering them in their wake, screaming and yelling.
Just behind Odigbune was Victoria Osseteku, and following them, the rest of the armed St. Charles gang. In the ensuing chaos, the Henry Compton students scattered.
Most of the Henry Compton group made good their escape, but Sofian had split from his friends and found himself dangerously isolated at the top of the stairs. The St. Charles group spotted him and suddenly made him the focus of their maelstrom of aggression and hate.
Off me! Where you guys
He became interlocked with his attackers and tumbled down the stairs. At the very bottom of the stairs, the mob descended on the defenseless Sofian Bellemoaden. He had no chance.
Victoria Osateku was watching this horrendous violence with glee. This is what she had wanted. As her friends fled, she sauntered over to the body of Sofian and kicked him with her foot.
The attack lasted just 12 seconds, but it was long enough for Sofian to be stabbed 9 times. One blow to his right shoulder was 12 centimeters deep and sliced through a lung. 2 blows hit a leg. Another shattered his rib cage and wounded his heart. Other blows damaged major blood vessels.
As Sofian lay critically injured, a Reverend, Canon Anthony Ball, made his way through the crowds of horrified commuters to comfort him.
I was just walking up the corridor and I saw a kid struggling to get up, surrounded by 3 or 4 others who were kicking him and making a stabbing motion that I thought was just kind of someone hitting at the time.
What happened as you approached Sofian on the ground?
He was trying to get up, and he was being kicked and hit. What subsequently I discovered was being stabbed. And as I approached, the teenagers round him kind of turned around and fled up some stairs that were just behind where he was.
And you were holding him as he was dying. Were you holding his hand?
Yeah, I was holding his hand, sometimes his shoulder, but his eyes had glazed over. He wasn't really connected. That's what I was anxious to try and sort of get some connection, but I think he was unconscious by that point.
The emergency services were called, but it was too late.
The paramedics brought Sofian to nearby St. Thomas's Hospital, where he was pronounced dead within the hour.
After the attack, the St. Charles pupils fled the scene. A number of them headed straight for a bus to try and make their getaway.
On the bus, they then realised that many of them were still carrying their weapons. And when the police headed the bus off, stopped the bus, they had to dispose of the weapons pretty smartish. Some of them went out of the emergency back window. The police were able to hoover them up. Others kicked them and pushed them under seats on the upper deck or the lower deck. Again, the police were able to then recover this weaponry.
They were arrested very swiftly afterwards by police because Victoria has a lot of police around it. And again, everyone was arrested within a matter of minutes. Again, I think that shows the naivety of these children. They thought they would make their getaway on a bus.
However, there was one key member of the group who did manage to escape the scene without being caught.
Victoria Osateku was one of the only ones who wasn't arrested at the scene of the crime. But instead of deciding to keep a low profile, she actually went to school the next day and began boasting about what she'd been involved in the day before.
There was a school outing to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and she was so full of what had happened, so excited by what had happened, so gloating about her part in the murder, that she couldn't stop bragging about it to her school friends.
This schoolgirl's role in this violent murder is truly shocking. What do experts Mike Berry and Dr. Liz Yardley make of Osateku?
One of the most extraordinary figures in this case is Victoria Osateku, and she seemed to wind up a lot of the participants, and yet she's a woman, she was there at the scene. It's an unusual kind of ringmaster in this particular terribly violent crime.
One interesting thing is we're finding more and more women being violent. There are violent gangs of women in all the major cities in the UK now. She seems to have adopted the role of the leader and the one that's instigating it by using the social media, which she's done extremely well. She's really wound up these kids to get behind her, and she's done that very successfully.
I mean, she knew exactly what buttons to push, didn't she? She knew exactly what things to say that would get people riled up. And I think when you have an environment like the online environment, when you're in a virtual type of communication, you are likely to be more extreme and more violent and more graphic than you would be if you were, in the lunch hall at college saying, well, how are we going to have this fight? How's it going to happen? I think when you're not face-to-face, you're going to be encouraging behaviour that is much more extreme.
The death of 15-year-old Sofian Belmowaden in 2010 here at Victoria train station after an assault by 20 youths truly shocked the commuters who witnessed it and the wider British public who saw it reported on the news.
Sofian was chased, beaten and stabbed in front of hundreds of horrified commuters. It all happened within a matter of seconds.
The build-up to Sofian's killing was captured on CCTV. That evidence, along with footage of a fight between the two groups the day before, meant it didn't take long for the police to track down the suspects.
The police realised very quickly that because there was so much evidence that all the children had travelled together, they'd all been involved in social media messaging or buying knives or distributing the knives, that they all must have had a very good idea that there was going to be a very violent confrontation that day at Victoria.
20 St. Charles College students were charged with murder under a legal principle called joint enterprise. This law allows defendants to be charged with offences they didn't personally commit if they can be shown to have taken an active and willing part.
And under those laws, that means that everybody can be charged with the murder, even if they didn't actually deliver a fatal blow themselves.
Now, this is a very controversial arm of the law, which basically allows a jury to consider whether a gang could all be charged with the most serious crime on the basis that they knew that something was going to happen.
It was the biggest joint enterprise prosecution ever in the courts in England and Wales. 4 trials lasting over 21 months here at the Old Bailey. In the end, the judge handed down 3 murder convictions and 5 for manslaughter. Others were convicted of lesser charges. In total, the defendants received 135 years in jail.
By the time the case ended, 17 teenagers had been sentenced to prison. Among them, Obi Nwake. Before his arrest, he did charity work alongside his studies. Nwake was sentenced to life with a minimum of 18 years for murder and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. Also sentenced to 18 years for murder and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm was Christopher Omorigi, one of St. Charles' star pupils. The prosecution said Omorigi stabbed Sofian as he lay on the floor. But the third and final murder conviction was handed down to a pupil who didn't even land a single blow.
One of the most surprising aspects of the prosecution is that Samson Odigbune was convicted of murder despite never entering Victoria Station on the day of the murder and being nowhere near Sofian when he was stabbed to death. Now, the jury did convict him because he was seen brandishing a samurai sword earlier that day and was seen to be inciting violence.
Another of the St. Charles gang seen to be inciting violence was Victoria Osateku.
She came before the court to try and create an impression that she was a poor girl who'd found herself just wrapped up in something that she had no idea was ever going to take place. And then suddenly her friends did something which she never expected, and she was frozen in the shock of the moment.
When I saw her at the court hearing, she looked at her family and said she mimed, "I love you." And I got really angry because you get still to say that, but I can't hear that words again, and I can't say it to my brother.
In February 2012, Victoria Osateku was convicted of manslaughter after a 5-month trial. She was found to have orchestrated the fight on social media and to have bought the knives used in the attack. She was at the epicenter of the violence and even kicked Sofian in the head while he lay on the ground. She told the jury she only nudged his head with her foot to see if he was all right. The jury didn't believe her.
So what do experts Dr. Liz Yardley and Mike Berry make of this intriguing case?
As criminologists, we try to categorise murderers in order to prevent future offences. What kind of social media murderers were these school children?
I'd say that this fits the antagonistic category. So you've got the escalation of threats and of these kind of honour contests online, this constant baiting of one another back and forth, and it escalates into face-to-face embodied violence.
That's the one thing about the social media is you send a message, you get, if I'm awake and respond, you can get it back within seconds. And the other thing is when they're giving messages, they're writing very short words, slang words, which gives you instant information, but doesn't give you a lot of discussion. And there's not a lot of thought going into it other than, here is my message.
It seemed to me that the social media accelerated things so quickly and that it weaponized the event, that there was no time or room for anybody to intervene or put the brakes upon it.
Well, I think what social media did in this example is to set the expectation, to say this is going to happen, and by having that out there, there's this idea of data permanence. So everybody's looking at their messenger going, oh, so apparently this thing's going to happen. And whereas when things are said, yeah, it might happen, it might not. But I think it creates that expectation that this is going to come off. We are all going to be there, aren't we? And I think that did kind of secure the fact that this was going to come about.
What safety net can anybody imagine or can you think of that would prevent a murder like this happening again?
Well, I think we just need to take a very long, hard look at how young people are using social media. Why are they using it in the ways that they're using it? And actually, do we need to step back and ask any broader questions? So why are young men so prone to use violence to display their masculinity and a sense of status and a sense of honour? What is actually wrong with our society that means that this is something that's okay?
I think what parents can do, and I know a lot of people are not like the sound of this, we have to be involved more with what our kids get up to. Because if we don't raise our kids, the gangs, peer pressure, social media would raise your kids for you. It means, as a society, we have to reflect back on ourselves and ask ourselves as parents, how can we be more of an influence on our kids than the social media, than peer pressure and gangs? How can we influence them more? And that is a very difficult process because it's already entrenched in this generation that social media and peer pressure and gangs are more influential amongst certain groups of young people than parents are.
Sadly, in the case of Sofian Belmowaden, the world of social media created a situation that led to his death and to 17 teenagers being sent to prison.
Still to this day, it hasn't hit me that he's gone. I know I can feel the pain and I feel that he's gone, but I always think that he just jumped on a train and he's on his way, just a train that's never ending. And one day it's gonna end and it's gonna come back. So there's always going to be that pain in my heart, so that will never be taken away, so it's always going to be there no matter how old I get, how long it's been, it's always so.